Again, my name is Tim Maguire. I'm president of QP Local 79. We represent many of the workers at TCHC providing services in the communities. Local 79 supports many of the recommendations in this report with some caveats, the largest caveat being funding. TCHC can only become the kind of housing provider tenants deserve if it is properly funded and now. Missing also from this and other discussions are concrete plans to increase the supply of rent-geared income social housing in Toronto. Over 90,000 households are on a social housing waiting list. I'll name a few of the recommendations that we're making, and if we have time, I'll go into them further. We think the City Council should commit to increasing the city's subsidy to TCHC now to guide development of the interim funding model and ensure appropriate funding levels in 2018. Invest in expanding Toronto's rent-geared income social housing stock. Make any new seniors housing entity a division of the city. And while that hasn't been specifically articulated, I don't think yet today, I can get into that a little further later, or if there are questions around that. Involve frontline workers at TCHC in the development and implementation of the decentralization pilots. Ensure frontline workers have the stability they need to focus on delivering services to tenants in the midst of more change by providing successor rights through whatever organizational governance changes are made. There has been a lot of instability over the years since the inception of TCHC, change after change, and we need to have stability. And while the final point we were making is a comparator in terms of the scattered housing, we think that there has to be some caution taken to ensure that the stability is actually remaining in scattered housing, and ensure that service isn't automatically determined to be better provided by other providers, and there should be an audit in terms of what services are provided and ensure that the appropriate services are provided in the most stable way. And I also suggest to stop calling it scattered housing. If these houses are part of the continuum of social housing that needs to be provided, I would suggest we come up with a different name to make sure that it reflects that it's part of stable social housing in the city. Again, back to the issue of funding. The PricewaterhouseCoopers analysis indicates that TCHC will require $402 million in additional funds in 2018 and $415 million in 2019. TCHC has not been adequately funded for capital repair, and the capital plan faces a $2 billion shortfall over 10 years. So we think the subsidy should be increased, and that subsidy should happen now. The most significant cause of current crunch is the fact that city subsidies have remained relatively flat despite rising operational costs and growing service needs. According to the staff report, the 2017 $37 million subsidy increase to TCHC's the only cash increase from the city in 15 years. So I won't go too much into the funding at the moment. Expand social housing to match the growing needs of our city. Again, over 90,000 households are on a waiting list, and yet the city has not developed a strategy. Recently, as we've discussed earlier, housing is being closed without a strategy on what to do about it. And again, a new services seniors housing division should be created at the city. There's lots of examples in the city where there's cross-divisional service supports. Just an example has been the Investing in Families, Investing in Neighborhoods, where TESS, Public Health, and Recreation cooperated to provide various services. Am I out of time? Okay. No, sorry. I'm going to turn it over to a frontline worker who can continue.
Thank you. My name is Karen Pascual. I'm a Tenant Services Coordinator at Toronto Community Housing. I've been with the company since 1989. First, at the Tenant Placement Department, now known as Housing Connections. After 10 years, reorganization moved several employees, including myself, out to the field and into positions called property administrators. Very quickly, I learned the difference between working at head office, where names and application numbers supporting documentations were just that, a dehumanized version of the people we were trying to help. Once I started meeting the residents, the level of service one provides changes very quickly, and a sense of ownership in the community you work in becomes part of your job. When amalgamation happened, the service approach evolved and moved to a centralized model slowly began. I was part of MTHA, or Metro Toronto Housing Authority, where a decentralized approach was preferred. Using this model, PAs like myself, together with other maintenance staff, would have a hands-on approach in every tenancy. From the moment we were notified of a move-out, we would oversee its preparation for occupancy. And since most of the work was done in-house, we could turn a unit around in less than 15 days, unlike the current model, which has proven to take up to 6 months before anyone is housed. Over a period of time, the centralized model took a toll on TCHC, both from a business and customer service perspective. Site staff were left powerless to prevent any revenue loss due to the shift in responsibility. Head office also began signing leases for different communities, which proved problematic as well. We no longer knew who was supposed to move in, leaving the door open for potential fraud. In addition, residents who were recently evicted for cause were being rehoused within months. A decentralized model allowed site staff the pleasure of being the resident's first point of contact, which is key to ensuring the long-term level of comfort people have when moving into a new community. This initial connection ensured that the rules and responsibilities that govern residents and staff were clearly discussed at the onset, in addition to things that make each community unique. Residents quickly recognized the fact that TCHC is in the business of keeping people housed, despite some of the challenges they face in ensuring compliance with the requirements subsidized housing obligates them to follow. Once a resident moves in, the challenges of life sometimes takes a toll on their tenancy. Having a connection with on-site staff relieves some of that anxiety that people feel when coming forward with difficult issues.
I'd ask you if you could conclude shortly.
Yeah. In conclusion, there's a reason why head office is often referred to as the ivory tower. And that's because there is perception that the people who work there are detached from what's really happening in the various communities. Each building, townhouse complex, and community is unique, and even though a successful tenancy may mean many different things, it is the site staff that invest the most time and effort into ensuring that residents achieve that success, because we are just as invested in it as they are.
Thank you both very much. Other questions from Councillor Cressy?
Well, thank you both for being here. So I just want to make sure I understand correctly. So QP Local 79, on the seniors point, you're supportive of the recommendation, but you think it should be a division. It should explicitly note what the governance model will be. Is that correct?
That's correct. And while there has been, as I indicated earlier, successive change in TCHC, which has brought a lot of instability to our members, for us to be sitting here advocating and agreeing with further change is somewhat contradictory, but we think it brings the best line of accountability back to City Council. And there can be lots of things done between city divisions in making sure on the seniors issue, between seniors, seniors housing, long-term care, and on the housing front, from shelters, seniors.
Okay. So that I understand that on seniors housing. And on the scattered homes recommendation, and I took your point that perhaps a different name, I heard Councillor Fletcher mention family homes would be more appropriate, but do I understand correctly that you are supportive but cautionary? Is that correct?
I'm cautious about assuming that all of the, I think it's unclear what services are being provided to whom in the scattered housing, by whom, to whom. And I think there should be an audit of that, a review of that, and not assume that all the services that are provided at TCHC should be provided by another provider. We're not saying don't review that, don't make any changes, but make sure that, what are the principles of service provision that need to be maintained, and follow through on them, those principles, and then decide on who the provider of the services ought to be. And again, if there are governance changes, to make sure that those employees affected are provided with redeployment or successor rights, whichever is appropriate.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Councillor Fletcher would be next, and then Councillor McLean.
Thank you. I'm just really interested in hearing a little more about the decentralized model of turning a vacant home or a vacant apartment back onto the renting market so quickly. And was that done in the operating, like the CHU level for many years, and now it's been centralized?
Yes.
Is that what you're telling me?
Yes.
And then there was Bing, I think, was in there at one point.
And if I can add this is one of the reasons, an example why it would be important to have frontline workers involved in the models of decentralization pilot projects that are going to be happening, so they can bring to the table what actually happens on the ground in housing.
And there's I think that's helpful. Anything else you want to tell us about that turnaround? What made it so quick?
We were actually mandated to turn it around in 5 days, to be honest. So as soon as we were notified of a move-out, we were there inspecting the unit and calling out contractors already, unlike the current system where we actually have to wait until the unit is vacant before any work is even done.
So you wouldn't wait till the unit is vacant?
No, because the lease provides us an opportunity to inspect the unit prior to them vacating, so
Oh, I
we use
see.
that
So
opportunity.
when somebody would be leaving, let's say on June 30th, you would know that, you would go in ahead of time, you'd look and see what work needed to be done and line up the contractors.
Correct, yeah.
And now you have to wait till somebody leaves on June 30th and then start the process at that point.
Well, that's actually only part of the problem. Part of the issue also includes the offer process. The offer process was taken away from the site office and is now done through our head office,
Offer process in offering,
selecting people from the waiting list.
I see. But how does that have to do with the turnaround?
Well, we would also be doing that prior to anybody moving out.
Oh, so you'd have a tenant selected, knowing they're moving in, whatever time, 15 days later, so within a certain period of time, they would be guaranteed the move-in.
Right.
And is that all documented somewhere, that process?
I believe it was back in the Metro Toronto Housing Authority days.
So that's the MTHA model.
Right.
And then we moved to a different model that you think isn't as good. We should reconsider. If it wasn't broken, don't fix it? Yes?
Well, putting the three companies together, I guess they just decided on one direction and not the other.
So you're suggesting we revisit that model from MTHA days to be more efficient with getting units open and people in them as quickly as possible?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor McMahon?
Thank you very much. This is just a quick question with regards to your comment, Tim, about terminology. So with the use of the term scattered homes, so what I've heard opposition and support for, both opposition support for that term. What would you recommend?
I don't have a recommendation. I just think scattered doesn't make it seem like it's part of a system, a continuum of social housing. I'm hearing single-family homes in my right ear.
I
don't have a suggestion.
No, but what do you say when you're referring to them? What's the term that you use?
I use scattered housing because that's the current
Okay.
terminology, but I
Great.
think that greater
okay.
minds should think about that.
Thank you.
It's part of the social housing safety net.
Thank you. Any other questions of these deputies? Councillor Burnside?
Through you, thank you. We've heard some issues, well, quite a few issues about safety and quality of life, and I know you've mentioned some ways, to have the on-site staff more involved to address that. Do you have any other suggestions?
Well, sorry, just a quick one. Our community safety unit was actually stationed off of our communities, especially the larger ones, and they were in contact with the site staff on a regular basis. We don't really see that anymore. We also had a really close relationship with the Toronto Police at one point, and we all sort of worked together in resolving any kind of issues that we had in the community.
Okay, thank you. And this is probably,
If I can add one more, because I think
Absolutely.
one of the pilot projects that's being looked at here is coordinating with the city on making sure that the appropriate services are there for youth at the TCHC and the city. And we applaud that. But let's involve frontline workers that actually provide those services at both in determining how that project will work. We think that TCHC can be more responsive to community needs, particularly on this front. And this is a positive move, just to engage others in that process.
okay, thank you. You mentioned some staffing issues of the changes, like successor rights. Have you sort of taken a look at the totality? Are there a lot more issues? And is there a cost, what would the cost associated with that be?
Well, I wouldn't be able to determine that because we don't know what governance decisions are going to be made, and different governance decisions may affect more people than others. But let's take senior citizens, senior services, for example. I think we represent about 450 workers at TCH and maybe 50 or 100 that work in seniors. And so if that's going to be a division of the city, then the people providing those services should have successor rights to that work, or if the city makes another decision where part of TCHC goes someplace else, those workers should have successor rights.
Okay, but you don't have the cost
No.
quite yet. Okay, and then my last question, because I have 8 seconds. You identified 402 million extra additional dollars needed for 2018.
That's from the report itself.
Okay.
So we're just, yeah.
So do you see that all coming from the city, and if so, how?
We see the city should increase its subsidy to the TCHC to start solving some of the problems that are happening at TCHC. Of course, I applaud the moves by the city to be advocating senior levels of government to actually make their contribution as well. And I think we should develop strategies on how to do that. For instance, at the FCM. The FCM, I go to the FCM all the time. The FCM talks about physical structure, physical infrastructure. They ought to be talking about making sure that cities are appropriately funded on social infrastructure side, particularly social housing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions of these deputants? All right, thank you very much, both of you. Appreciate it.